Now, I found out that the Greeks, who were supposed to have been the founders of civilization because they were the first civilized white folks, but the Greeks got their civilization from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians were black people. And the Greeks passed their civilization on to the Romans. They couldn't retain it, they lost it. They had a dark age in Europe for 500 years. And then another bunch of Africans, the Moors, from North Africa moved into Spain and started civilization all over again. So instead of Europe civilizing Africa, Africa has civilized Europe 2 times. They said that the earth was flat like a pancake out in the vastness of space, with the sun and the moon and all the stars going around it. The ancient Egyptians in the Pyramid Age 6,000 years ago knew that the world was round. They knew that it went around the sun in 365 and 1/4 days. They measured the circumference of the earth, and they calculated it so accurately until modern astronomers said their error was only 1 yard. Circumference of the earth is about 25,000 miles, and they calculated it with an error of about this, 1 yard. When I was a boy down in Aiken, South Carolina, at Sunday school, I was taught that God created the white man as the superior race. And he, after the flood, when Noah was celebrating the end of this great deluge, he got drunk and took off all of his clothes and was doing the striptease. And one of his sons, named Ham, thought that this was really funny, and he started laughing. And God looked down from heaven and said, I will not tolerate this disrespect for parents. So he turned Ham black and shipped him off to Africa, and he doomed Ham and all of his descendants to be hewers of wood and drawers of water for their more fortunate brothers. In other words, Africa was of no importance in world history because it was settled by an accursed race. And I got this story in church. When I went to school, I got the same story. And then I would go to church, and the preacher would get up and ask us to sing a hymn, "Oh Lord, bleach us out whiter than snow, that we may enter into the kingdom of heaven." And then I say to myself, I don't think I'm going to make it. And then they had another one. You can have all the world, but just give me Jesus. And I began to have the idea that there was something wrong with this. I couldn't imagine that everybody else had a history, but only the African people didn't have one. And then I began to study the theory of evolution. And the Bible, the way the Bible has been corrupted by white folks, you get the idea that the human race started out being white, and that the superior type of human being is a white man, and the yellow people and the brown people and the red people, they are a little bit lower, but the black man is the low man on the totem pole. He's the nobody.
Hello guys, I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're having a great time. Welcome once again to the channel. I'm sure you've probably heard of this thing we call Western civilization, but have you ever asked yourself where it came from? Because one thing that the media has fed us over the years is that Western civilization is something that was innate for white people, but not in Africa or even among black people. You will be told how great white men made inventions. We have also been told how God is a white man, Jesus Christ was white, and many other stories. But today I came across this clip. It is a speech that was given by this professor many years ago, but it is eye-opening and it has a lot of information that is quite necessary for anybody who understands history or even wants to understand better history. Let's watch.
When I was a boy down in Aiken, South Carolina, at Sunday school, I was taught that God created the white man as the superior race. And he, after the flood, when Noah was celebrating the end of this great deluge, he got drunk and took off all of his clothes and was doing the striptease. And one of his sons, named Ham, thought that this was really funny, and he started laughing. And God looked down from heaven and said, I will not tolerate this disrespect for parents. So he turned Ham black and shipped him off to Africa, and he doomed Ham and all of his descendants to be hewers of wood and drawers of water for their more fortunate brothers. In other words, Africa was of no importance in world history because it was settled by an accursed race. And I got this story in church. When I went to school, I got the same story. And then I would go to church, and the preacher would get up and ask us to sing a hymn, "Oh Lord, bleach us out whiter than snow that we may enter into the kingdom of heaven." And then I say to myself, I don't think I'm going to make it. Then they had another one. You can have all the world, but just give me Jesus. And I began to have the idea that there was something wrong with this. I couldn't imagine that everybody else had a history, but only the African people didn't have one. And then I began to study the theory of evolution. And the Bible, the way the Bible has been corrupted by white folks, you get the idea that the human race started out being white, and that the superior type of human being is a white man, and the yellow people and the brown people and the red people, they are a little bit lower, but the black man is the low man on the totem pole. He's the nobody. So I said to myself, I know there's something wrong with this. So I got up to Harlem and heard Dr. Harrison lecture and heard J.A. Rogers give lectures, and I went and studied with Schomburg, and they began to tell me what to read and what to study. And then I found out that the first human beings were not white folks, they were black people, because the human race started in Africa millions of years ago. And these black people were the first members of the human race, and some of them wandered into Europe and got bleached out white, and some of them wandered into Asia and got bleached out yellow, and some of them wandered into America and got bleached out red. But the original man was the black man. And then I found out another thing, that in these these people wrote their own histories, and the Christians say that God is an oversized man. Their image of God is a big man. These ancient people in Africa said that the first God was a woman. They said because in the process of evolution, the female sex is the primary sex, and it comes first. So the woman must have become before the man. And if the first human being was made in the image of God, God must have been a woman. And there's a book out now by an author named Merlin Stone, When God Was a Woman. Now, I began to study, and I found out that you go back and study the ancient history of Egypt, and especially the religion of ancient Egypt, and they had a Bible. I have a good English translation of it in 3 volumes in one, called the Theban Recension of the Book of the Dead. And in this, you take this Egyptian Bible and compare it with the King James Bible, which is popular among the Protestant denominations in the United States. And you study the Egyptian Bible and you study the Christian Bible. The Egyptian Bible goes back 10,000 years. The King James Bible only goes back about 300 years. The King James, I think it was about 1619. And then you study these 2 books and compare them, and you find out that the Christians took the whole Christian Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, out of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So that if you want to go to the source, don't go to King James. Go to ancient Egypt, and you've got a Bible that's 10,000 years older than anything that these Christians have. Now, after studying this, I decided to do some research and writing, and after dropping out of college, I would work on a job in the day and go to the library and study at night. In those days, they kept the libraries open until 11 o'clock at night, so that if you couldn't go to school, you could go to the library. Nowadays, they close, sometimes the library closes early, so if you wait, you're not going there. I had the good fortune to be born before there was any radio and before there was any television, so I had to learn to read, write, and count. Today, with television and radio, you have students going through college, graduating with a degree, and then they can't even write their own name. There was a University of Iowa, a student who was a football player. He graduated with a BA after his name. He was planning to be a professional football player. He had an accident and broke one of his feet, so he had to take a job as a parking lot attendant, and then when he signed the job application, he misspelled his own name. This is what you have going on today. Now, here's what I wanted to say. According to the King James Version of the Bible, if you go to a Protestant church, you find a big Bible there, and in the back of it, they have the chronology of Archbishop Usher of the 16th century, an Irish Archbishop of the 16th century, and he tells you how old the world is according to the King James Version of the Bible. And he tells you that God created the earth in the year 4004 BC. And I began to study the history of Africa, particularly the history of Ethiopia and Egypt. And I found out that the Egyptians built the Great Pyramid over 1,000 years before the earth was created. And then I ran across another biblical scholar, the Vice Chancellor, the Reverend Professor Lightfoot, Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University, and he improved on Usher. He says God created the world in the year 4004 BC on September the 22nd. It was either September or October, I don't remember, at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now I'm wondering what day of the week was it? And if the world was created on this particular day, on this particular year at 9 o'clock in the morning, what happened at 8 o'clock? I mean, you have all these unanswerable questions. So then I began to do research, and we were told that this godlike white man, the first civilization in the world was that of the Greeks. They was supposed to be the most intellectual white people that ever lived. And that they created a great civilization and then passed it on to the Romans. And all the great civilizations were created by white folks. Back in 1934, an English historian named Arnold J. Toynbee wrote a study in history, a history of the world in 12 volumes. Don't try, if you find the book in the library, don't try to read it, because one of the hardest books to read is Karl Marx's Capital, and he was an even worse writer than Marx was. That's a record. Toynbee says there have been 21 civilizations in the world. So many were created by the white race, so many by the yellow race, so many by the brown race, so many by the red race. The black race has not created one civilization. None at all. We have done nothing. So I was giving a lecture in New York, and somebody says, well, didn't Toynbee know that the Egyptians were black people? I says, Toynbee says they were white people. You see, if you are a racist historian, you don't have any regard for the facts at all. I visited West Africa in 1977, Senegal. Then I went to Kenya, that used to be British East Africa. Then on up to Egypt, to Cairo, and to outside of Cairo to look at the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, and then took a plane up the Nile River to the ruins of Thebes and walked through the temple of Ammon at Amun-Ra that was built in 3700 BC, the greatest temple that was ever built in the world. And I saw all of these great things. And we know that black people built all of these things. And yet Toynbee was supposed to be the greatest historian of his day, a professor at Oxford University, and he tells you that these people were white. And if you listen to these people, you'll get your mind terribly balled up. Down in Kenya, outside of Nairobi, I visited a village of people that called the Maasais. The Maasais of the same racial stock as the ancient Egyptians and the Ethiopians. And while I'm standing there looking the village over, some of these people came up and I was shocked. All the authorities that I have consulted told me that these people were members of the white race. And they were blue-black. In Senegal, where they say the people are Negroes, most of them were sort of medium brown color. None of them were actually black, but they are Negroes. And then you go over to East Africa among the Maasais, and most of them are blacker than a blackboard, and they're white people. So I mean, if you're going to get the lowdown on history, you've got to use your own head, not somebody else's. Now, I found out that the Greeks, who were supposed to have been the founders of civilization because they were the first civilized white folks, but the Greeks got their civilization from the Egyptians. And the Egyptians were black people. And the Greeks passed their civilization on to the Romans, and the Romans were a very stupid, dumb bunch of people for the most part. They couldn't retain it, they lost it. They had a dark age in Europe for 500 years. And then another bunch of Africans, the Moors, from North Africa moved into Spain and started civilization all over again. So instead of Europe civilizing Africa, Africa has civilized Europe 2 times. So that's what you have to keep in mind. And now I want to say something about why it is that I have to be talking to you about African history. The reason I'm talking to you about it is because it's not in the textbooks. And it's not in the textbooks because we don't write textbooks. We have other people write the textbooks and they put that propaganda in there, and we are supposed to swallow it. Now, we are told that after the Greeks were taken over by the Romans and their civilization decayed, and then the Roman civilization went down after the fall of Rome, and you had a 500-year dark age, we were told that Christianity re-civilized Europe and produced modern civilization. And we know, if we read the literature, that these white Christians of Europe are the dumbest people that ever lived. They said that the earth was flat like a pancake out in the vastness of space with the sun and the moon and all the stars going around it. The ancient Egyptians in the pyramid age 6,000 years ago knew that the world was round. They knew that it went around the sun in 365 and 1/4 days. And their astronomers measured the earth, and they knew what the polar diameter was. They knew what the equatorial diameter was. They measured the circumference of the earth, and they calculated it so accurately until modern astronomers said their error was only 1 yard. In other words, the circumference of the earth is about 25,000 miles, and they calculated it with an error of about this, 1 yard. So if you read history the way it happened and not the way other people wrote about it, you will find out that the black race created the civilization, civilized the white folks 2 times. So that you want to get some perspective on this. And the white folks took the religion of ancient Egypt, of Ethiopian Egypt, and boiled it up completely. They'll tell you that if you get some of this cheap literature like the Jehovah's Witnesses people turn out. I remember seeing one of their quarterlies. God is sitting up on a golden throne in heaven. Blue eyes, blonde hair. Next to him is Jesus Christ, also with blue eyes and blonde hair. On the other side is the Holy Ghost, also white, and a bunch of angels in the background white. And a bunch of people kneeling on the ground worshiping this God, black and white. Underneath is hell with the devil black and all the imps black. So it looks as though since white people are not admitted into the Christian heaven, then we all going to wind up in hell. But I told my students they had nothing to worry about, because the only unpleasant thing about hell was the heat. It's too hot down there. But since if you go there, you're going to stay a long time, and if you stay long enough, you get used to the heat, so that then it won't bother you anymore. And then I found out that the Africans were dragged into the slave trade because the white folks were too lazy to work and produce the things that they wanted. And they dragged us into slavery, converted us to their particular brand of Christianity. And the African had a much better religion over in Africa. That's what I call Christianity before Christ. He had a much better religion. The Christians tell you that there's a God sitting up on a throne in some place called heaven who created the whole universe, and he created the human race, and they turned out to be such a worthless bunch of people, and they had to have a flood drown out most of them to give the race a new start. And then this new bunch of people went to pot, and finally had to send his only son down to be crucified to save these people. And that's what they call the Christian scheme of salvation. Now the Africans had a religion which was much better. In ancient Egypt, if you will see a copy of my new book called Christianity Before Christ, and there's a long section in there on the mysteries of Egypt. Those are the religious rites of the ancient Egyptians. And you will find out that these people, in other words, there are 2 types of religion in the world. Supernatural religions or theistic religions, and then you have natural religions or atheistic religions. A lot of people have an idea that if a man is an atheist, that is, if he doesn't believe in a personal God, he's an irreligious person. That's not true. The Africans had an atheistic type of religion, and they were deeply religious people, because they believed in that man not only has a body, but he also has a mind, soul, or spirit. And they took the position For instance, if you went to a temple in ancient Egypt and told the priest that you wanted Horus, the Egyptian Christ, to save your soul, he would tell you not to waste his time. That Horus, Osiris, Isis, and nobody else is going to save your soul except you. In other words, they tell you this. They say, we believe in reincarnation. You have lived before. You've come back to the world. And if you want a better life, the next time you come back, you'll have to earn it yourself. The gods are not going to give it to you. And the Egyptians told these people, if you want a better life the next time you come back to the earth, you live a good life now, and then when you come back, you'll have a better life. But if you lead an evil life, the next time you come back, it'll be worse. So it's up to you. Yeah, so that they told people not to pray to gods or angels or anything to save them. It was their job to save themselves. And I think that's a better religion than asking some dead Jew to save you. Now, these people, they believed in spiritualism and they believed in theosophy. And the whole world, all the religions of the world can be traced back to this African source. And Christians say their religion is true, but paganism is false. And as I've told some preachers, Christianity was stolen from the pagans. So if paganism is false, so is Christianity. Now, you say to yourself, well, when the Africans, a member of anyone who believes in the African traditional religion, he tells you that he believes in God. But he doesn't believe in the type of God that the white folks believe in. The white folks believe that God is an oversized white man sitting on a throne somewhere up in a place called heaven. The African traditional religion teaches you that there's a large number of gods. You have tree gods, sun gods, moon gods, earth gods, star gods, and all like that. And since a group of colleges make up a university, then a group of the little gods make up the big God. So you take all the little gods and merge them together, and you get the great God, which is the universe itself. It never started, it never was created, and it will never have an end. And so therefore they said that the great God is nature itself, the universe, and they believed in a doctrine of the Trinity. God is the physical universe. Christ is the mental universe. And matter and mind interact and produce life. So you get a trinity of matter, life, and mind. And that's it. And to show you how we have been badly miseducated and misled, one of my friends is a great black scholar, Professor Yosef Ben Yochanan of Cornell University. Some of you probably met Dr. Ben. Ben went into the Metropolitan Museum in New York, where they have a very fine Egyptian collection. And the young lady is sitting at the desk. Sir, what can I do for you? Dr. Ben says, I would like to visit the African collection. The young lady says, sir, we do not have an African collection. And Dr. Ben says, I meant to say the Egyptian collection. Oh, yes, we have an Egyptian collection. But you know the ancient Egyptians were not white people. Now, the ancient Egyptians, yes, we have an Egyptian collection, but the ancient Egyptians were not Africans. So Ben pulls a map back out of his pocket, shoves it right in this girl's face. Young lady, here's a map of Africa, and there's Egypt. Wouldn't you say that Egypt was in Africa? She said, I could say so. Ben said, do you say so? She said, no. Ben says, young lady, you are a jackass. The young lady became hysterical. She hollered for the manager. The manager came out and running and says, what's the trouble? Mr. Manager, this man just called me a jackass. So the manager says, what's the problem? Ben told her the story that he was looking for the Egyptian collection, and this young lady said that the Egyptians were not Africans. And he says, I have a map here, and here's Egypt, and Egypt is a part of Africa. Wouldn't you say so? The man says, well, you could say so. Do you? No. Ben says, you also a jackass. So he said then he ducked out and got out of the vicinity because he was afraid they're going to call the police and put him in the jug for disorderly conduct. So this is the way we have been miseducated. Now, since Egypt was a great African culture, we find out that a few years ago there were no black Egyptologists. We did have one recently, but he died at an untimely age, and that was Dr. Diop of Senegal. I visited him over in Africa and talked with him back in 1977, and Diop, besides being an Egyptologist, he was a lot of other things besides. So then we have a young lady who is an authority on Egyptology. She's now working for the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago and doing research in New York as Mrs. Deidre Wimby. You might have heard of her. She's a young lady that is going to be the first black woman Egyptologist. Now, there was a brilliant scholar at Howard University a few years ago, Professor William Leo Hansberry. He graduated from Howard. He went to Harvard University and was planning to work for a PhD in Egyptology under Professor George Reisner. He was one of the outstanding Egyptologists in this country. And Reisner got up before the class and says, of course you know that the ancient Egyptians were white people. And after he got through, Hansberry put up his hand. Well, Mr. Hansberry, what's your question? He says, I want to challenge that statement you made about the ancient Egyptians being white people. He says, I've read Herodotus' history of Egypt, and he says the ancient Egyptians had black complexions and curly hair. He says, well, Mr. Hansberry, I don't accept Herodotus as an authority. So Hansberry tackled him. He says, listen, Professor, Herodotus visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, and he saw these people. You didn't visit them, and you didn't see them. So Hansberry had him kicked out of his class. So here he was trying to get a PhD in Egyptology, and the professor of Egyptology booted him out of the class. So he went to see the head of the Department of Anthropology, Professor Ernest Albert Hooton. And he says, Professor Hooton, what shall I do now? He says, well, Mr. Hansberry, he said, if Reisner won't give you a PhD, you're not going to get it in this country. He said, I think you should go over to England and try to sign up at either Oxford or Cambridge. And he gave him some references. And he went over there and he told him that he wanted to get a PhD in Egyptology. And the people in England were more honest. At both Cambridge and Oxford, they told him that they did not want any black Egyptologists, so they weren't going to give him a degree. So Hansberry had to come back to the United States and get a job as a professor of history at Howard University. And then when he retired, he went to Nigeria and was given a position as the director of the Hansberry Institute of African Studies, or some such title as that. And he was running a school of African history in Africa, and he was writing a 4-volume history of Africa. After finishing 2 volumes, he died. And the publishers couldn't find anybody else to finish the other 2 volumes. So they buried it. This is probably the greatest history of Africa that's ever been written, and the publishers have decided not to publish it. So we are being crossed up at every turn. And you find out that to show you what a vicious breed of people these racists are, in my book, Man, God, and Civilization, I quote a psychologist from the University of Chicago. This was back around 1909, a man named Professor R.M. Cattell. And in this book, he said that the whole Negro race should be painlessly exterminated because they were a menace to humanity. Fortunately, people didn't buy his argument. They didn't round up all the black people and have them exterminated for the benefit of humanity. But the way the world is going now, if we can't retake our fame, as Dr. Edward Wilmot Blyden said, if we were once on top, if we can't get on top again, they probably will exterminate us. And people tell me, well, how are we going to do it? Well, I'm a retired member of a union in New York City, District 65, UAW, AFL-CIO, and we say that if you have a problem, you have to solve it. Nobody else is going to do it for you.
What a wonderful speech there. Scholars of African civilization like John G. Jackson, Cheikh Anta Diop, and Ivan van Sertima assert that Africa was the cradle of human progress, with its ancient societies shaping global culture long before Europe's rise. They argue that Egypt and Ethiopia pioneered advancements in mathematics, astronomy, and architecture, evidenced by the pyramids and Ethiopia's early written scripts. Diop emphasizes Egypt's Black African identity, linking its achievements to broader continental genius, while Van Sertima highlights pre-Columbian African voyages to the Americas, suggesting cultural exchanges ignored by mainstream history. West African empires, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, boasted thriving economies and intellectual hubs like Timbuktu, rivaling Europe's medieval stagnation. Scholars also note that More's transmission of African knowledge to Europe, fueling the Renaissance with algebra, medicine, and classical texts. These thinkers expose lies distorting Western civilization's origins. One falsehood is that Greece independently birthed philosophy and science, when scholars like Herodotus acknowledged Egyptian mentorship of Greek thinkers. Another myth portrays Africans as culturally barren, despite their early metallurgy, urban centers, and maritime networks, like the Swahili coast trades with Asia, while Europe trailed behind. They claim that monotheism emerged solely from Judeo-Christian roots, ignores African precedents, such as the monotheistic worship of Amun or Osiris resurrection tale, which prefigure biblical narratives. Eurocentric histories also erase Africa's role in Europe's awakening, crediting the Renaissance to internal genius rather than Moorish African catalysis. These distortions, scholars argue, serve to uphold a narrative of Western supremacy, obscuring how its foundations rest on African innovation. By reclaiming this legacy, they challenge the sensitized tale of a self-made West, revealing a civilization indebted to Africa's unheralded brilliance and enduring influence. That is it from me today. Tell me down in the comment section what you think about this, and if you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.